Never give in to the devil's curse. If you do, you'll always find something worse. If the people wanna put you down, go where all the miracles are found. Tomorrow's sun is gonna shine so bright. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be alright.
What you just heard was the song Everything Is Gonna Be Alright, created by an independent songwriter who you can find right here on YouTube. As of the recording of this video, he has over 35,000 subscribers, and his channel consists of original love songs, all created, composed, and sung by him. Chances are you have not seen his channel before, and you have never heard of his music until now, but some of you might have heard his name, as he has been referenced in pop culture and has a part in American history. His name is John Hinckley Jr., and he has an interesting past. John Hinckley Jr. was born on May 29, 1955, in the town of Ardmore, Oklahoma, into a small family consisting of his father, mother, brother, and sister, where he was the youngest in the family. His father, John Hinckley Sr., was the chairman, chief executive, and president of the Vanderbilt Energy Corporation, an independent oil and energy company that was founded and created by him. He managed the company very well, and the Hinckley family would accumulate a substantial amount of money from the oil company as a result, money that he would use to put his family and his children on the right path in life. A few years after he was born, John Hinckley Jr. and his family would move from Ardmore, Oklahoma to live in Dallas, Texas, where he would spend most of his childhood. John Hinckley Jr. was a pretty average child growing up, but there were some issues at home. His father was described as a workaholic who spent more time managing his company than he did with his own family, and his mother was a stay-at-home mom who suffered from agoraphobia. But despite that, he had a very average childhood. Throughout primary school, he was described as a good student who did well in academics, had many friends, and played extracurricular sports like basketball and football. He lived a privileged lifestyle with his family, where they were able to get him and his siblings whatever they wanted. However, things started to change in his life during his high school years. His interests in sports and hanging out with friends began to diminish, and he would go on to isolate himself from the world and spend most of his time in his room alone. His older brother and his sister would go on to describe him as becoming a bit of a drifter and a loner during this point in life.
But sometime during high school years, John seemed to start withdrawing a little bit. Well, first of all, he didn't start dating girls in junior high and high school, and what boyfriends he had did start dating girls, so he lost his boyfriends and never acquired girlfriends, and he just withdrew into his room and started playing guitar and listening to Beatle records all alone, and that was the way he spent a great deal of his time.
He would go on to graduate from high school and attend college at Texas Tech University, where he applied for a major in business administration. But he attended classes irregularly and didn't do much outside of school besides isolate himself. Throughout his late teens and early 20s, John Hinckley went through life aimlessly without any purpose, relationship, aspirations, or goals in life. But he did have a lot of dreams, particularly dreams of becoming famous. Inspired by the works of singer and songwriter John Lennon, John Hinckley would go on to find an interest in music, his only real aspiration in life. He began to teach himself how to play guitar and to write songs not long after. He would spend his days alone in his room listening to music from his favorite artists and teaching himself to play guitar, dreaming that one day he could be just as famous as John Lennon and other musical artists like him. He wanted to make his dream a reality, but didn't put much effort into it and lacked the talent and drive to do so. He hoped that one day he would inherit the wealth of his family and use that money towards his music career, but his family had other plans. They wanted him to move on with his life and get an education and a real job, but Hinckley didn't want to give up on his dreams. In 1975, wanting to make his dreams a reality, John Hinckley dropped out of college and told his family that he would travel all the way to Hollywood, where he believed that he could become a songwriter. Sometime after arriving in Hollywood, he would write back to his family explaining how he was able to get in touch with a music studio to create a demo for his songs and that he would be making an original album soon. Not only was his music career about to begin, but he would also meet a person by the name of Lynn Collins, a young actress from Hollywood who Hinckley met and fell in love with. He wrote to his family often about how happy he was with her and how his career, despite everyone's doubts, was about to get off the ground. It almost seemed too good to be true. And that's because it was. In actuality, John Hinckley never had a demo or an album in the works. He never had a deal with a music studio, and he never met a girl named Lynn Collins. He lied to his family about all these things because he wanted them to, quote, get off his back. In actuality, he was spending majority of his time in Hollywood living in hotel rooms, watching TV, and listening to music, not putting in any effort to make his music career a reality. He was able to find a job working for a photographer, but was struggling financially and would ask his parents periodically for money. He was alone, unmotivated, and failing to find any sort of relationship or love. But he was able to find a new love, a love that he found in the world of cinema. In 1976, while still struggling to make it in Hollywood, John Hinckley would frequent the theater, seeing whatever movie he could, but there was one movie that came out that year that would become his new obsession. A movie that seemed to resonate with him and relate to the struggles that he was facing. A movie by the name of Taxi Driver. Created by renowned filmmaker Martin Scorsese and starring the talents of Robert De Niro, Taxi Driver tells the story of Travis Bickle, a Vietnam veteran and ex-Marine suffering from PTSD, insomnia, mental illness, and loneliness, who starts a new career as a taxi driver in New York City.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
After witnessing enough crime while on the job, Travis begins to see the city as a cesspit of crime and decides to take things into his own hands. He comes up with a way to clean up the city by becoming a vigilante. The movie was well received upon release, and today is widely regarded as one of the greatest films of all time, but did receive some controversy during its release due to the depiction of graphic violence and the film's casting of 12-year-old actress Jodie Foster, who played a child forced into prostitution. Regardless, Taxi Driver's success launched the careers of everyone involved, and it was well received by critics and audiences alike, including John Hinckley Jr. This movie resonated with John Hinckley. He fell in love with this movie and would go on to see it over 15 times. But not only did he love the movie, he also found a connection with the character of Travis Bickle. His struggles with loneliness and worthlessness in Taxi Driver were similar to Hinckley's struggles in real life, and he never felt something so relatable to him. Hinckley would go on to imitate and base his entire life off the character of Travis Bickle. From dressing up in military fatigues like Travis, to writing his thoughts down in a diary like Travis. John Hinckley was in love with the movie and its character, but he found an even greater love for an actress in the movie, the aforementioned Jodie Foster. John Hinckley had a fixation with Jodie Foster and wanted her all for himself. And for the next few years, he would develop an erotic obsession with her and try anything to get her attention and start a relationship with her. John Hinckley's time in Hollywood came to an end later in 1976. He admitted to his family that he lied about his music career getting off the ground and moved back in to live with them in September that year, on the condition that he take care of his own living expenses. After returning home, he would reapply for college, where he changed his degree from business administration to English. But like before, he attended classes irregularly and spent most of his time isolating himself from the world, watching TV, playing his guitar, and obsessing over music. But now he had a few new obsessions. His obsessions with Taxi Driver and Jodie Foster. Over the next few years, he continued this cycle of attending college irregularly, coming up with ways of becoming famous, and obsessing over Jodie Foster, but still living an aimless life that went nowhere. Throughout the years, he found himself in deeper isolation from the world, Isolation that brought him to dark places in his mind, making him feel pointless and like a failure. With nothing to latch onto in his real life, he began to latch onto characters that he saw on TV and movies, whether they be fictional or real, mainly characters like John Lennon and Travis Bickle. Seeing himself as a famous musician like Lennon or a hero like Bickle, even though he had yet to accomplish anything. In August 1979, wanting to be more like Travis Bickle, John Hinckley bought his first gun, the first of many, and would go on to practice shooting at the firing range. Later that year, he was diagnosed with depression and shown to have a pattern of disillusionment. Because of this, he was prescribed with antidepressants and tranquilizers, but this was only the start of his deteriorating mental health.
We now look back and realize that John had very flat emotions. He never laughed, he never cried, he never yelled, he never screamed, he never got angry. He was just flat.
Throughout late 1979 and early 1980, he would visit doctors for numerous ailments, which included dizziness, allergies, problems with his nervous system, and would later suffer from an anxiety attack. He would be prescribed Valium on top of his prescription to antidepressants and tranquilizers, none of which seemed to help with his ailments. John Hinckley continued his dreams of becoming a songwriter and fantasizing over Jodie Foster at a distance, but soon he would find a way to get close to her, like never before. In May 1980, Jodie Foster would go on to take a break from her career in Hollywood and attend classes at Yale University in Connecticut. John Hinckley found out about this while reading People magazine and thought that this would be the best way to meet her and express his undying love for her. In September of that year, he told his family that he was going to enroll in writing classes at Yale. Thinking that this would be the perfect way to put him on the right path in life, his family gave him the money for enrollment. But instead of using the money for courses, he used the money to travel to and from Connecticut and Colorado, purchasing hotel rooms close to the campus. He arrived in Connecticut later that month, and for the next few weeks, he began to stalk Jodie Foster during her time on campus. He followed her between classes, and even found the address of the dormitory where she was staying. He would fill her mailbox with handwritten letters and love poems. Most of them went ignored by Jodie Foster. He eventually found the phone number for her dormitory and began to call day and night in order to speak to her. On some occasions, he managed to speak with her over the phone, where Jodie Foster would politely decline his advances on her and continue to ignore him.
I don't know who's weirder, you or me.
Jodie Foster wasn't interested in him, but John Hinckley didn't see it that way. In his mind, he wasn't being ignored by Jodie Foster because of her lack of interest, but because he thought that his letters and poems weren't enough to express his undying love for her. John Hinckley started to think of ideas that would better express his love for Jodie Foster. And the ideas he came up with was to become a famous individual like her, accomplish something that would make him a part of history, or at least do something that would make it difficult for Jodie Foster to forget him. In his mind, he thought that it would be impossible to ignore someone if they were a part of history. His ideas ranged from continuing his music career, which hadn't gone anywhere in the last 4 years, to doing something more drastic, like hijacking an airplane or committing in front of her on the street. Struggling to find any ideas that worked, he looked to his favorite movie for inspiration. In the movie Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle meets a woman named Betsy, who is the campaign manager for Charles Palantine, a candidate running for president in the movie. After being rejected by Betsy, Travis Bickle tries to get back at her by attempting to assassinate Charles at a campaign rally, in a fashion that was based on a real-life assassination attempt in 1972. John Hinckley took this idea and thought that if he attempted something similar, it would be the best way for him to get famous quickly and become a part of history, which would make it impossible for Jodie Foster to ignore him. He was going to perform an assassination that would guarantee her attention and a place for him in history. But he wasn't going to assassinate some political candidate. He was going to go beyond that. He was going to assassinate the person who held the highest position of political power in America, the President of the United States. The idea of becoming famous from assassinating the president wasn't too far-fetched, as there are many people who have done so and have made their names part of history. John Hinckley thought that he could be one of those people, and it would give him the attention he needed to get Jodie Foster's affection. His target was then President Jimmy Carter, who at the time was on tour for his re-election campaign against his opponent Ronald Reagan. John Hinckley took the money that his family gave him and used it to purchase guns, ammunition, plane tickets, and bus tickets, which he used to follow Jimmy Carter on his campaign trail. From late September to early October, John Hinckley stalked Jimmy Carter on his re-election campaign from Washington, D.C. to Columbus, Ohio. On October 2, 1980, Jimmy Carter made an appearance in the city of Dayton, Ohio. Over 1,400 people were in the crowd watching as Carter gave his promises for re-election, not knowing that one of the people in the crowd was John Hinckley Jr. On one occasion at the rally, he got within less than 20 feet of Carter and almost carried out the assassination attempt, but didn't go through with it because he, quote, couldn't get himself in the right headspace. 1 week later, Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign brought him to Nashville, Tennessee, and John Hinckley was following not far behind him. But his plan to assassinate the president would soon be delayed. After arriving at Nashville International Airport in Tennessee, John Hinckley was arrested by airport security after finding weapons in his suitcase from the airport's X-ray machine. In his suitcase, they found a .38 caliber pistol, two .22 caliber pistols, a box of high-velocity hollow point rounds, a pair of handcuffs, and a plane ticket to New York, which just so happened to be the next stop on Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign. Hinckley was arrested for possession of weapons and taken to jail, but was released the same day after paying bond. He might have been released, but he left empty-handed. His guns were confiscated by the police and would later be turned over to the FBI. Information about him would also be turned over to the FBI, but the FBI never gave the information about Hinckley over to the Secret Service, because they had no idea that Hinckley was stalking the president or his plans to assassinate the president. Throughout the month of October, he would continue to travel around the country to stalk Carter, but most of the time going back to New Haven where Jodie Foster was. On October 13, 1980, Hinckley traveled down to Dallas, Texas, where he would purchase more guns using a fake ID after having most of them confiscated in Nashville. He purchased a .22 caliber RG-14 revolver and a box of Devastator rounds, a special type of ammunition that explodes on impact. He continued his travels throughout the rest of the month, still sending love letters to and calling Jodie Foster, and trying to find any opportunity to assassinate Jimmy Carter, but to no avail. On October 20th, 1980, after running low on money, John Hinckley put his assassination attempts on hold and went back to his family in Colorado, where his family would express great disappointment in him for not following through with his promises of finding a career. Due to his isolated manner, his family did not know about his obsession with Jodie Foster, his love of Taxi Driver, or his current attempts at assassinating the president. They just saw him as a young man who couldn't follow through with his promises, first being his career in music in Hollywood, and now his career in writing in Connecticut. Of course, his family had no idea what he was actually doing during that time.
Was he ever violent?
Oh, no. The gentlest child. Never any violence.
After arriving home, Hinckley would continue his love for music by practicing his guitar and listening to music. He continued to write in his journal about his love for Jodie Foster, but things were not going well for him mentally. His depression started getting worse, and he developed an inability to cope with frustration, an emotion that he has felt all his life. Things got worse for him later that year.
The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news from Poland, Iran, and Washington tonight. Former Beatle John Lennon, who was 40, was shot and killed last night outside his luxury apartment in New York. News of Lennon's death touched off a wave of shock and mourning around the world.
On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon, the man who inspired Hinckley to take up music, and the man he aspired to be, was shot dead outside his apartment in New York City. Hinckley was devastated by this, and even contemplated taking his own life. On New Year's Eve that year, he recorded himself expressing his frustrations of the world, John Lennon's death, his love for Jodie Foster, and the plans that he had for 1981. John Lennon is dead. The world is over. Forget it. It's just going to be insanity. If I even make it through the first few days, I still regret having to go on with 1981. I don't know why people want to live. John Lennon is dead. I still think about Jodie all the time. That's all I think about, really. That and John Lennon's death. They were sort of binded together. I hate New Haven with a mortal passion. I've been up there many times, not stalking her really, but just looking after her. I was going to take her away for a while, but I don't know. I am so sick I can't even do that. It'll be total city. I mean, I couldn't care less. Jody is the only thing that matters now. Anything I might do in 1981 would be solely for Jodie Foster's sake. My obsession is Jodie Foster. I've got to find a way to find her and talk to her some way in person or something. That's all I want her to know is that I love her. I don't want to hurt her. I think I'd rather just see her not on Earth than being with other guys. I wouldn't want to stay here on Earth without her. John Hinckley continued his plan to get Jodie Foster's attention by assassinating the president. However, there was a slight change to his plan. On November 4th, 1980, Jimmy Carter lost the presidential election to his opponent Ronald Reagan, who had won the election in a landslide vote and was inaugurated into office in January the following year.
In a few days, I will lay down my official responsibilities in this office to take up once more the only title in our democracy superior to that of president, the title of citizen. As I return home to the South, where I was born and raised, I look forward to the opportunity to reflect and further to assess, I hope with accuracy, the circumstances of our times. I intend to give our new president my support, and I intend to work as a citizen, as I've worked here in this office as president, for the values this nation was founded to secure. Again, from the bottom of my heart, I want to express to you the gratitude I feel. Thank you, fellow citizens, and farewell.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
May I congratulate you, sir.
He was America's newest president, but he was also Hinckley's newest target. Throughout early 1981, Hinckley would continue to travel periodically from his family's home in Colorado to New Haven, Connecticut in search of Jodie Foster, and to Washington, D.C. for any chance to assassinate the president. This would go on until March 7th, 1981, when Hinckley's family had had enough. After years of failing to look for a job, an inability to follow through with his promises, and unable to become financially independent, John Hinckley's family had kicked him out of the house. They thought that this would give him the proper motivation that he needed to get on with his life. His father gave him a little bit of money and told him that he could never come back to the house. For the first time in his life, John Hinckley Jr. was now on his own. Hinckley was at his lowest point. He had accomplished nothing and had nowhere to go. With nothing to lose, he decided that now would be the best time to follow through with his plan to assassinate the president and get Jodie Foster's attention. On March 25th, 1981, he packed his bags with his letters, music, ammunition, and gun, and asked his mother if she could drive him to the airport. They sat in silence as they drove to the airport, and when they arrived, John Hinckley got out of the car and grabbed his things. But before leaving, he told his mother, "I want to thank you, Mom, for everything you've done for me all these years." Using what little money he had left, he purchased a plane ticket to Hollywood, where he spent one day there. Afterwards, he purchased a cross-country bus ticket out of Hollywood and took the bus to Washington, D.C.
Listen, you you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore. Who would not let... Listen, you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum, the dogs, the filth, the Here is someone who stood up. Here is...
Hinckley arrived in Washington, D.C. a few days later on March 29, 1981. He checked himself into the Park Central Hotel and made his way to the White House, intent on carrying out his plan to kill the president and get Jodie Foster's attention. He arrived at the White House later that day, where he would stand outside waiting for the president to arrive, but to no avail. He went back to his hotel later that afternoon to reevaluate his plan. On March 30th, 1981, Hinckley woke up that morning, left his hotel, and went to a nearby restaurant to get himself breakfast. On the way back to his hotel, he found that day's newspaper, which stated that President Reagan was going to be giving a speech to the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton later that day. Hinckley took this information and knew this would be the perfect opportunity to carry out his assassination attempt. He went back to his hotel, cleaned himself up, and loaded his .22 caliber RG-14 revolver with Devastator rounds, the gun he purchased a few months prior. But before he left, he wrote one final letter to Jodie Foster, explaining how he was doing this all for the sake of her love. Dear Jodie, there is definitely a possibility that I will be killed in my attempt to get Reagan. It is for this very reason that I am writing you this letter now. As you well know by now, I love you very much. Over the past 7 months, I've left you dozens of poems, letters, and love messages in the faint hope that you could develop an interest in me. Although we have talked on the phone a couple times, I have never had the nerve to simply approach you and introduce myself. Besides my shyness, I honestly did not wish to bother you with my constant presence. I know the many messages left at your door and in your mailbox were a nuisance, but I felt that it was the most painless way for me to express my love for you. I feel very good about the fact that you at least know my name and how I feel about you. And by hanging around your dormitory, I've come to realize that I'm the topic of more than a little conversation, however full of ridicule it might be. At least you know that I'll always love you. Jodie, I would abandon this idea of getting Reagan in a second if I could only win your heart and live out the rest of my life with you, whether it be in total obscurity or whatever. I will admit to you that the reason I'm going ahead with this attempt now is because I cannot wait any longer to impress you. I've got to do something now to make you understand in no uncertain terms that I'm doing this all for your sake. By sacrificing my freedom and possibly my life, I hope to change your mind about me. This letter is being written only an hour before I leave for the Hilton Hotel. Jodie, I'm asking you to please look into your heart and at least give me the chance, with this historical deed, to gain your love and respect. I love you forever. John Hinckley. Shortly after writing his letter, he put his gun in his pocket, left the Park Central Hotel, ordered a cab, and made his way to the Washington Hilton to carry out what he called the greatest love offering in the history of the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Reagan gave his speech to over 5,000 members of the AFL-CIO that day and left with good spirits from the crowd. He exited the Washington Hilton with police officers, Secret Service agents, and White House aides all by his side as they made their way to the presidential limousine and motorcade. A small crowd of onlookers and reporters gathered outside the Washington Hilton, wanting to see the president as he passed by. No one knew that one of these onlookers was John Hinckley Jr. with a gun. Watching Reagan come around the corner, Hinckley knew that this was the moment to carry out his assassination plan, become part of history, and get the attention of Jodie Foster. Not seeing a better opportunity, John Hinckley Jr. made his way to the front of the crowd, got into a crouching stance, pulled out his gun, took aim, and fired. In less than 2 seconds, Hinckley fired all 6 shots at Reagan and was quickly apprehended by the police, Secret Service, and members of the crowd who were closest to him. Secret Service agents acted quickly to protect Reagan, throwing themselves into the line of fire, pushing Reagan into the limousine, and immediately drove to the White House for his protection.
And green coming out. Horsepower, Shattuck. Advise we've had shots fired. Shots fired. There are some injuries. Lay one on. Horse, Shattuck. Stay so, Shattuck. Rawhide is okay. Follow up. Rawhide is okay.
Rawhide was not okay, but this was not known at the time. As mentioned earlier, Hinckley fired all 6 shots from his revolver, but majority of them missed the intended target and hit members of the crowd, resulting in 4 injuries. The first person to be injured was White House Press Secretary James Brady, who was struck in the head just above his left eyebrow with a bullet passing through his brain cavity. The second injury was police officer Thomas Delahanty, who was struck in the back of the neck while trying to find the suspect firing at Reagan. The third injury was Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, who upon hearing the shots, put himself into the line of fire between Reagan and the shooter to protect the president. As a result, he took a bullet in the abdomen that passed through his right lung, diaphragm, and the right lobe of his liver. The final injury, an intended target, Ronald Reagan, was struck in the chest. However, it was not a direct hit. The bullet that hit Reagan was a ricochet that bounced off the armor plating of the limousine, striking him in the chest just below his left armpit, grazing his ribs, puncturing his left lung, and missed his heart by less than an inch. Reagan didn't even realize that he was shot, but said that he felt a strong pain in his chest, which he believed to have been a broken rib after being forcibly pushed into the limousine by Secret Service agents Jerry Parr and Ray Shattuck. It wasn't until he started to cough up blood in the back of the limousine that he realized he had been shot. Secret Service agents quickly noticed this and made a last-minute decision to divert from driving to the White House and drive to the nearest hospital instead.
You want to go to the hospital or back to the White House? We're going to Crown. Okay. Gordon on route. Gordon on route. Gordon on route. Go on, Drew. Roger, we want to go to the emergency room of George Washington. That's a Roger. Oh, to George Washington fast. Roger, Sergeant, down, quick. Let's hustle. Let's stand by. Go ahead. This horsepower is terribly broken. I just caught the tail and say yes. Go ahead. Let's get some agents up there to help. Horsepower halfback, we have an arrival, CW. Would you contact WFO or some other division to get additional people sent to this location? Fort South, Mumford. Roger, going to leave with Rainbow until that location. Station calling Horsepower. Repeat, please. Horsepower, this is Officer. We're going to go to that location with Rainbow. Roger, George.
President Reagan arrived at George Washington University Hospital just 4 minutes after being shot. Secret Service agents advised him to be wheeled into the hospital on a stretcher, but Reagan didn't want onlookers to be alarmed. He got out of the limousine and, with a bullet in his chest and rapidly losing blood, walked into the hospital without any assistance until he got inside and began to lose his balance. He was immediately helped by hospital staff, who took him to the emergency department where they began to treat him for his wounds. But things did not look good for the president. Reagan was 70 years old at the time and had lost over 40% of his blood volume, but a new threat would soon be present. As mentioned earlier, John Hinckley used explosive Devastator rounds in the shooting. Out of all 6 rounds that he fired, only one of them went off, and it was the one that struck Press Secretary James Brady in the head. The other rounds failed to detonate, including the one that was inside Reagan's lung. There was the possibility that it could go off at any moment. Reagan was sent in for emergency surgery, and despite the dire situation, he kept a positive attitude as to not alarm anyone. Being known for using comedy during his time in office, he cracked a few jokes with hospital employees during his evaluation and surgery. He jokingly told one of his nurses, "All in all, I'd rather be in Philadelphia," and jokingly told his surgeons, "I sure hope all of you out there are Republicans." Surgery began shortly afterwards, and after 2 long hours, they found the bullet and removed it from the president's lung. The surgery was a success, and Reagan was taken to his hospital room for recovery. His wife Nancy arrived at the hospital shortly afterward, and when she arrived, he jokingly told her, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Reagan survived the shooting. And so did the other men who were injured. Police officer Thomas Delahanty survived the shot to his neck, with the shot bouncing off the back of his spine due to the bullet's low caliber. He survived the shooting, but was left with nerve damage in his left arm. Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy made a full recovery from the shot to his abdomen, and would go back to serving in the Secret Service for a few more years. Press Secretary James Brady survived being shot in the head, but never made a full recovery. The impact and explosion of the Devastator round resulted in brain damage that left him with slurred speech and paralysis. At the end of the shooting, all 4 men survived. No one was killed. After surgery, Reagan continued to carry out executive decisions from his hospital room. Less than 2 weeks later, in April of that year, Reagan was finally able to leave the hospital, and later that month, he would return to office to carry out the rest of his presidency.
I'd like to say a few words directly to all of you and to those who are watching and listening tonight, because this is the only way I know to express to all of you on behalf of Nancy and myself our appreciation for your messages, your flowers, and most of all, your prayers, not only for me, but for those others who fell beside me.
It might seem strange, but in a way, Reagan actually benefited from the shooting. After surviving, his approval ratings went up over 70%. In 1984, he would be re-elected for president in a landslide vote. And strangely enough, the shooting also brought people together on opposing political sides. From 1981 to 1989, Reagan served 2 full terms as president of the United States, and on a few instances, he even made jokes about the assassination attempt against him.
We're reminded of the many traditions of openness and democracy that have marked the history of this city. Amir missed me.
Basically, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that Hinckley's attempt to assassinate the president was a complete failure. But assassinating the president was only part of his plan. The end goal was to make himself a part of history and get the attention of Jodie Foster. He did get her attention, as well as the attention of millions of people in America. Millions of people who wanted to see him convicted for what he did. Now, there's a lot that happened in John Hinckley's trial, and there's too much to go over in great detail, so I'm just going to give you the abridged version. Hinckley was immediately apprehended outside the Washington Hilton during the shooting. He was taken to jail soon after and would later be transferred to Butner, North Carolina, where he would spend the next year and a half awaiting his trial and for his lawyers to work on his defense. While his lawyers were working on his defense, the prosecution was working on his sentencing. The prosecution argued that there was enough evidence against Hinckley to determine premeditation to the shooting. Some of the evidence included his travels across the country to where President Reagan and former President Carter were campaigning, his purchase of the revolver and type of ammunition that he bought for the shooting, and his detailed notes that he left for Jodie Foster, just to name a few. The evidence was enough to potentially charge him with 13 criminal charges, each one that could result in years in prison for his malicious intent to murder the president. But the defense for Hinckley saw things differently. The defense claimed that Hinckley's attempt to kill the president was not because of any malicious intent, but because of a delusional state of grandeur that came from undiagnosed mental illness. Hinckley had already showed signs of mental illness long before the shooting, but none of the signs were picked up from his family or his doctors at the time due to his isolated nature. The defense worked on evaluating Hinckley to prove that his mental illness resulted in him to be classified as legally insane. Despite everything that he did, his family stood by his side and got him the best lawyers and psychiatrists for his defense. The defense hired psychiatric expert Dr. William Carpenter to evaluate Hinckley, and after many hours of evaluation, he determined that John Hinckley Jr. had 4 major symptoms of mental illness: an incapacity to have ordinary emotional arousal, an autistic retreat from reality, an inability to work or establish social bonds, and depression including suicidal features, which he attempted to do a few months before the shooting and later attempted twice during his time in custody awaiting trial, one by overdosing on Valium and another where he tried to hang himself with an article of clothing. Dr. William Carpenter would go on to diagnose Hinckley with schizophrenia and dysthymia, as well as narcissistic, borderline, and schizoid personality disorders. In his words, this resulted in Hinckley's defects with reality, his judgment, and caused Hinckley to latch on to fictional characters that he saw in movies and in real life, all causing him to become detached from reality and become an unpredictable danger to himself and others around him. The prosecution, however, did not see it that way. They testified that even if he was mentally ill, the mental illnesses that he was diagnosed with would not be enough to classify him as legally insane. But after months of presenting evidence to the court, the prosecution failed to provide hard evidence in their favor, because on June 21st, 1982, John Hinckley Jr. was found not guilty due to reason of insanity on all 13 charges. As you can imagine, this decision was a shock to many. More than 80% of Americans disagreed with this decision. Regardless, John Hinckley was found not guilty and would later be classified as a danger to himself and to people around him. He was sentenced to spend his days at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., where he would go on to spend most of his life until he was considered no longer a threat to himself or others. His treatment for mental illness began immediately after his arrival to St. Elizabeth's, where he was given many restrictions from interacting with people in the facility and the outside world. After years of therapy and medication, he would eventually come to realize that his obsession with Jodie Foster was wrong and regrets bringing her into his deluded attempt at becoming famous from shooting the president, an event which he would also later go on to regret. Things weren't all bad for Hinckley at St. Elizabeth's. During his time there, he continued his attempt at learning music and playing guitar, and would later meet a woman named Leslie DeVoe, a former teacher and fellow patient at St. Elizabeth's who Hinckley had started a relationship with, a relationship that lasted over a decade. In late 2003, after being committed for over 20 years, Hinckley made significant progress in his mental health treatment and had many of his restrictions lifted as a result. In 2016, more restrictions were lifted after making progress with his treatments, and he was allowed to leave the hospital, but with many limitations to who he can talk with and where he can go. During all this time, he continued to create music and artwork under an assumed name, and in late 2020, he was allowed to create his own YouTube channel where he could share his music with the world and still continues to upload there to this day. And finally, on June 15th, 2022, A judge found that John Hinckley Jr. was no longer a danger to himself or others and had an excellent prognosis, and as a result, he was granted full release after 40 long years of treatment. Later that year, he would get a record label and have his first album released the following year. He performed for a few sold-out venues across America, and as of the making of this video, he still continues to compose and perform music on his YouTube channel.
Hello everybody, this is my latest original song.
While some of you might be wondering how a person like him could have a YouTube channel given his criminal past, it's really not that strange, as there are many YouTubers on this site that have committed crimes and still have a platform on here. This video is not made to deplatform him. This video is not made to make you feel sympathy towards him. And this video is not made to justify what he did. This video is about John Hinckley Jr., a mentally ill man who never got the treatment that he needed when he was younger and wanted nothing more to be famous and become part of history. He got exactly what he wanted, but in the worst way possible, and in a way he would later go on to regret. But things could have been much worse for him and the people involved. If the bullet that hit Reagan was a direct hit instead of a ricochet, if Timothy McCarthy didn't put himself between Reagan and Hinckley, if the Secret Service went through with their plan and drove to the White House first instead of the nearest hospital, or if Hinckley had used a gun with a larger caliber, it's likely that one, if not all 4 men could have died that day, and Hinckley would have been classified as a murderer. Luckily for him, that didn't happen, and he was able to get a more lenient sentencing, a decision that has divided many people even to this day. On one hand, people see him as nothing more than a would-be assassin who should spend the rest of his life locked up. On the other hand, people see him as the perfect example of what mental health treatment and therapy can do for victims of mental illness. It's now been over 40 years since the shooting, and a lot has changed since then. Policies have changed, laws have changed, mental health awareness has changed, and of course, John Hinckley Jr. has changed. He's now a free man who has been given a second chance at life, a second chance that he wants to use making art, music, and fulfilling a dream that he's had since he was a child. Whether you think he deserves it or not, I'll let you decide.
I'm trying to show the public that I'm not the person that I was so many years ago. If they want to think I'm the person that I was 41 years ago, yes, I could see that, but that's not the person I am now. For the Reagan family, for the Brady family, for the families of the other 2 victims, for Jodie Foster, I apologize for what I've done, for what I did 41 years ago. I'm truly sorry, I really am. I'm not sure they could forgive me, and I probably wouldn't even blame them if they don't forgive me. If I could take it back, I surely would.
Do you think you've paid your debt to society?
Yes, I do.
In what way?
I worked hard to overcome my illness, and I'm trying to give back to the world now through my music and my art, and that's kind of my way of paying back my debt to society.